Hey, this is just me and Maximüs Groves shooting the shit for an hour and a half. He's a comic based in Atlanta, Georgia. I think it's Georgia. That's where Atlanta is, right? Atlanta, Georgia. That sounds right. And I'm Benjamin Boyce, and so we just talk about things. This is just fun. There's no issues here other than, I guess, bro issues. Brissues? Him shoes? Maybe that's what we should call them, though tissues and men have a strained relationship. Here you go.
That was an amazing show. We did a parody roast of Game of Thrones characters, and so it was Daenerys was being roasted, and so the challenge was that the White Walker has never spoken, so he technically is the highest status character like in the entire series, since it's literal death incarnate, right? Yeah. And so the entire joke is, how do you make this guy vulnerable? And so I was thinking, oh, okay, I just play him as Jack Skellington from The Nightmare Before Christmas. And so just opened, like clearing my throat, like lots of silence, like a mime or something. And then like a cappella, there are few who deny, into his like song. And then when he finishes, having replaced like Game of Thrones words in there, then jumping into Little Mermaid, part of your world, because he wants to join the game, you know? And the biggest laugh came in for down past the wall, down where it's southern, down where they sleep with their cousin, aunt, or brother. And yeah, that'll probably be the best set I ever have in my life. Just from that weird.
Don't sell yourself short, but that sounds pretty classy.
It was a good one. There is some amazing creativity happening in Atlanta, whether or not like. And particularly because, like, we've seen our friends make it the correspondent for the Daily Show, Dolce Sloan, like, came up through here, you know, as a stand-up, and other people have been just loving both the scene and the people in it as they come up. I recall Rory Scovel recorded a special here because he was so in love with the Relapse Theater, and it's like avant-garde style. If you don't know of Rory, definitely look into him later, because he is one of a kind.
Was he a Daily Show dude?
No, he never was. He's not.
What's his last name?
Scoville, Covel. Okay. And I think Jack White produced his stand-up special. Which is an interesting choice for him, but they like appear in a weird sketch in the middle of it. But he's very much like, he did one set on Conan while dressed in a tux with a ballroom piano playing behind him, and just sort of like opining randomly between non-jokes, and it was hilarious. So yeah. Hard to like detail and explain what exactly that is as like a thing. But
so do you have a regimen? Like, you have a set? Are you coming up? You're invested in creating and in interacting with comedy as a discipline, I guess. Are you active? I guess is the
probably. I guess the answer is no. But there is sort of, I guess, just a backlog of stuff that worked. But like, I'm such a weird guy that I never quite understood how to get like the audience, and everything is always subjective towards like whoever's there, you know? And so like, and so it is always an experiment to adapt to how to address what is the public consciousness of like this spirit in this moment.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so because of that, it's very easy to have like the biggest home run ever, and then complete dead failure like immediately after, the same night, even from like room to room. But it is very.
So for established comics, that's just something they deal with, and they just keep on going forward.
Well, that's kind of like the road method. Like, you know, you just keep going around the country and finding like a new spot for different people. But by that point, you've probably done each of those jokes in your touring set almost 1,000 times. Like, deconstructed every pause, every sort of like little hiccup, every like way of delivering. It's kind of like a Rubik's cube that you mix up for the audience, and then as you start to peel off the stickers, you just smash it on the ground instead. Like that's essentially how a joke more or less works in my mind. And and the only stuff that ever worked for me was like dramatic irony and storytelling, and through like failures in relationships like that. Everyone got that. And I guess I just don't want to be such a sad sack anymore. So I'm just trying to like fix myself, and then I can write actual jokes instead of just being sad about stuff.
Oh, okay. So that kind of like that persona, you think, kind of like was influencing you.
Yeah, like you feel like you end up in this moment where you start mining your own life for drama, and like you almost feel like this author of Selfdestruction just to find some story out of it that you can profit from later or something.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah. No, I feel a similarity in like the way that I was using my YouTube channel to gain more YouTube channel was that 10-minute, like, I'm going to mock this academic or I'm going to mock this paper or this article and deconstruct it. And I found myself becoming more and more acerbic, or, kind of like, as in the taste, like very just like kind of my voice and my tone, like I wasn't being generous. I wasn't really, there wasn't like a depth to me. Like I was kind of becoming shallow in a way, like this persona was kind of taking over me. And I kind of like really scaled back for a while. And I'm still trying to balance, like the snark, like putting in the snark, but then like turning it back around on itself and making it like something not too destructive to public discourse, but still engaging in the, in the fray, like diving into the fray, but still exuding some sort of humanity. I don't know. I'm still trying to figure out the balance, because snark is, people like it, and it can't, done right, it's like really entertaining and satisfying in a way.
Well, yeah, that's it is the same fight, particularly when there's a full audience in front of you expecting like, do your job, be funny, like you end up like for the first at like 2 years, you end up fully retreating behind like this persona shell you've constructed, just where like the literal joke and can recite it for them, and feed the hungry masses. And then suddenly when you learn how to be both vulnerable and fearless at the same time, suddenly you're now being spontaneous and creating real genius out of the moment of humor, because you no longer are allowing the threat of public danger and threat to damage you and who you are as you present out for them. And
that's a good mix, vulnerability and courage at the same time, or confidence, I guess you said.
Well, it like only works that way. Like I had a weird thought in college, like when I was reading like, I hate to immediately pivot to like Campbell, but like that is essentially like what this whole cultural moment is surrounding with, right? With Jordan Peterson and kind of showing up out of nowhere. But I realized in a weird moment that like the hero and villain actually walk identical paths, and that the only difference is that in the moment of ultimate test, the hero is able to submit himself to like the greater universe, and like the villain can only survive by crafting his ego into an unstoppable monster. And so having come through that final test, the villain is now like this master of everything we think as a surface is important or special, but like it's because they have like culled themselves of that like spirit in order, well, maybe not spirit, but like of that the perfect master of the tools that deceive us, I guess. And that whereas the hero was the person who was able to actually let it go and be unharmed by complete damage surrounding them.
Yeah, I wonder if there's kind of like, if the trickster, the archetypal trickster, is some sort of weird mixture of the two. Like the clever one, the one who does use ruses, Ulysses, or Loki, or I don't know, Milo Yiannopoulos, even though like he turned out to not, he's not doing so well now, but like he had a trickster persona that he was maximizing, and maybe I do remember Jordan Peterson saying, somebody that's that self-contradictory is bound to implode. But I mean, just wondering like being the trickster or the jokester, the comedian, is somehow flipping the hero and the villain expectations on their head, like turning
that's a funny point.
Villainy out of heroism and heroism out of villainy, or like comedy out of tragedy.
Yeah. Well, you always get to be both at the same time, so long as everyone's acting like a hypocrite. And apparently that's never going to change.
Well, what do you mean by that?
Well, it's like that. How do we say this? Like, so there's the classic archetype where the jester is the only one who can criticize the king when the king is acting like an idiot, right?
Yes.
Because part of his power is to put death on anyone who makes him act like an idiot. But the biggest threat to his power is the thought that a jester could insult him, right? Like that would reveal him to be the weakest king possible. Like that's,
okay.
So like that's kind of like the art of war theory of North Korean diplomacy. At the same time, like this is a weird jump, but like so like I forgot exactly where in the book it is, but like one of Sun Tzu's sayings was, if you are weak, act as though the strong would be too humiliated to strike against you. Mm-hmm. Right. And so that's why North Korea is basically like they're a harasser state, right? They're always like doing something insane because it doesn't make sense when we think they're insane people. That's because if we were to actually respond and crush them, everyone would unify against us because we would be that tyrannical, evil king who can't respond. Like North Korea is not a jester, but it is that same mechanism of response. Yeah, because they're so weak, they're too stupid to know reality. So to kill them would be a wrong move, would be an evil move or something.
Yeah,
and so like this was explained to me. Well, it wasn't explained to me. I read it as a comment on Reddit from a South Korean who was basically saying, you guys don't understand how embedded the art of war is into people's thinking and perceptions, right? It's like best friends. The second your back is turned, knife in the back, like that whole, apparently it's very
incredibly
culturally
cynical.
Embedded. A little bit. Well, like, in the West, we've got this cowboy sort of value where I will shoot you, but I will be looking at you in the face and you will be armed. That was literally Mal Reynolds in Firefly, right? And that's not Sun Tzu at all. Like that is not how you win a fight. That's how you hold on to your pride and your dignity.
And pride doesn't matter. Pride is something that you're okay with sacrificing in order to win.
Well, as a Westerner, no. But
yeah,
it's these are the consequences of, victory and defeat in the moment of the battle or the war, right? Yeah. And being conscious of how your enemy is thinking and what their vulnerabilities are related to how these archetypes play into their personalities and planning.
You know what? There's this person that I'm about to do an episode on, but every single. Well, not everybody, but anybody who goes after this person gets deplatformed. They get.
I saw your post for their city. That girl's or that.
Yeah, let's.
Yeah. The city hall thing.
Yeah. So, but I'm trying to figure out. Yeah. So this person kicks people off of Twitter, kicks people off of WordPress, kicks people off of Reddit now. Like Reddit admins will do their will, and this person does fake copyright strikes on people that do videos about them.
That's actually a crime. That. Person can find severe if they do if you have a successful fair use and YouTube takes your thing down, you have grounds to sue if your episode turns out that way, more or less.
So and the thing is that and now they're going up in front of public boards and like saying that I was responsible personally for getting that person kicked off, and I want you guys to prosecute her for her hate crimes for saying that X is not Y, right? So I want to do an episode on it, but how do I do that without like losing everything that I've gotten up to this point? If they have so much power, like that's what that North Korea thing is. That how do I present myself in such a way that you can't target me without proving my point?
Well, ironically, Donald Trump's solution was to make best friends, right?
Huh.
And you've got this cachet of respect for the transgender community, right?
Oh yeah, okay.
Maybe
not with this person, and yeah, that's what I was thinking. I'm like, well, you can't call me a transphobe because I've actually been platforming and like making connections between like people who don't like transgender ideology and actual transgenders who don't like the ideology either.
So you might be in an interesting space. So I don't know exactly. Are they Canadian? Because I saw that.
Yeah.
Okay. Because like we don't have a human rights court, so it's like demanding human rights charges in America. Like I can only see that in a random like California City Hall where they don't actually know how civics works, right?
Well, but, yeah, I'm protected on the legal front, but like my platform, like insofar as it is a platform, like it's still growing. I have a lot of work to do before like I can, like call it like an actual job. But like if it gets taken away,
you're doing the grind. You've got one out every day. Almost.
Yeah, I'm doing the grind. So what if that? Am I not like exposing myself to losing everything that I have by even mentioning this? And if everybody's scared to mention this person or go after this person, then like, who's going to be the one to take the knock on the chin? Besides Megan Murphy.
If you do take a hit for it, maybe you end up being the Sargon everyone would prefer, right? Like, because like everyone's basically saying we don't want anyone called N-words, even if it is the Nazis. But this wasn't fair, so we're protesting too. Right?
Yeah.
With you, they wouldn't have to have that disclaimer, right?
Well, I've gone back and I've edited at least one video because I just right before it became a big deal, I kind of like I played with that word a little bit just to make a point. As somebody who was stuttering while trying to pronounce the word Nicaragua. And if that's a hate crime or not, but it's just too hot to handle now.
Yeah.
Anyways, but yeah, maybe if I take the long game, it's just, and I bring that up, like we can go back to the universal, go back to the rapping that we were doing. Just like, how do you deal with somebody who's figured out a way to silence every opposition? And how do you be the unsilenceable opposition in that?
This is a funny dynamic because it's sort of like it's happening much more frequently these days because of I think because of two things. The ubiquity of technology that allows everyone's message to go so much further, and the sort of new guards like controlling that. Because we've kind of agreed in America philosophically, it might even be a continuing debate, but that it's far better to have the guilty go free than for the innocent to be punished. And so because of that, that contrasts the fundamental purpose of a justice system, which is to satisfy public rage. And so like we see it so frequently in like stories of like Soviet Russia or things of the past that it was most important to obtain the confession rather than investigate the crime. Because the product of having someone punished is this symbolic gathering of the public's rage so we can return to normalcy, even though eventually the rage of the innocent being killed will bubble up over it on its own as well. But then we just have to kill a member of the government, and then that satisfies that one, right? And so, like, this is an extremely cynical description of justice, but in practice, that is a successful justice system as it correlates to, or as it interacts with the angry mob. Okay. Yeah. Well, the internet makes it a little different because so as a result of this, we now have like a larger class of people in America who will not find satisfaction for crimes committed against them because procedural errors, because of bad cases, because we prefer the guilty to go free than the innocent to be punished. We end up with a supplemental sort of gossip network that kind of exists it exists to be out of self-defense in a sort of a manner of speaking. So
could we map that onto the Me Too movement as getting
absolutely.
Justice outside of the court? Like there's some guy, I can't remember his name, but up in Canada, he was accused, or he went to court like 3 or 4 times or even more. And like every court case got thrown out or he was exonerated. And then he wrote an article and it was published in the New York Review of Books. And then the editor that allowed that to be published got sacked the next day, right? So it seems like the justice system isn't satisfying the mob, or it's not satisfying the need for vindication for the crimes against womanhood, let's just say. So the womanhood is going to transfer its justice into the, almost like capitalism. It'll just like the market for justice is now operating on Twitter and through public pressure.
Kind of, yeah. But because of that, it's it is now a power source in of itself when it comes to influence and control, right?
Yes.
Because it now because the ad hoc, it's not ad hoc, but like Google came about spontaneously. The government didn't tell it to go exist,
Yes.
but it did create its own new power. So now its new power is like focused. Ironically, Harvey Weinstein's power was the same way, like spontaneously self-created and then corrupted, right?
Yeah. Okay.
And but so I was just cynical about justice, even though I actually firmly agree with the American system. So it's probably fair to simply say we're now to a point where it is in the interest to maintain that power of the Whisper alternate network through the merit of victimhood, right? Like this is I think, is it Jonathan Haidt and Peter Boghossian's point about the religious structure of secular life, more or less? Like, that we now have some kind of cultural programming that's self-reinforcing towards your virtue being tied to how much you've been harmed, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So if you ever self-actualize, you no longer can have power in this realm.
In a weird way, it's kind of like getting on food stamps. Like once you're on food stamps, it actually doesn't make sense to get a job because then you're going to lose your subsidy.
That's an interesting parallel. Yeah, the welfare state of pain.
Oppression works like you as long as you are oppressed, and it's pretty easy now. You just like figure out which category you can use to be oppressive. And white men such as you and me probably could say, well, I'm neuroatypical. I'm a freaking comic. I can't control my mouth. Like things just come out. Like it ruins my social standing. So, but if you figure that out, then you get like a steady stream of cultural capital in the form of likes or follows or you go girls, right?
Yeah.
But as soon as you start to prove yourself to be a strong, independent person and not rely on, that backlash, victimhood, progressive identity politics, then you are cut loose from that steady stream of income. And now, thanks to the IDW and Quillette and whatever all that stuff represents, I'm not, there's this alternative like form of like, no, we're going to praise you, we're going to give you attention, going to give you capital. Insofar as one, you stand up against this stuff, and that'll get you in the door if you stand up against this stuff, if you're anti-SJW or if you call it out or whatever, if you're just like, I refuse to do that, you get in the door there, that's the price of admission. But it seems like with the intellectual sphere, like you actually have to, that just enables you to actually add to the conversation. Because now we want to have a conversation. We're actually more inclusive and diverse than that other crowd, but we really want to engage with your diversity. And that's what I'm trying to model on the channel with like interviews with actual different people. It's like, okay, I'm in the door. I did my hard work. I did this evergreen thing. I proved to the world that I can like deconstruct social justice craziness, but like I actually want to go, what's the next step and how do I actually participate constructively in the culture? And then I don't know where I'm going with this, but like it's incentivizing. I think that if we do it right, we can incentivize like actual productive discourse rather than just get stuck in like easy food stamp kind of stuff.
Well, yeah, it sounds like you're trying to contribute to what would be a stable solution for society and the collision of these power forces. Like the thing that tries to synthesize both the importance and grievance and whatnot into a way we can actually have a stable exchange of recognition and suffering, and how healing can actually benefit both the self and the culture at large.
Yeah, yeah, and so not to avoid the trap of fetishizing suffering.
Yeah.
And actually just say, okay, suffering is necessary because that's what proves us, kind of Nietzschean, like that's what proves what I am. So I need that, but like I am not my suffering, because then I can never develop beyond that. I'm actually pretty uninteresting if all I am is my suffering. Right?
It's not a great thing to look at.
I mean, like with your comic stuff. Like
I was just thinking of sets that were just sort of like dumps of like bad moments. I was like, yeesh, no one came out enjoying that one. Huh. But I haven't watched Nanette, but some people I think had, that one was really interesting because it actually was kind of a pivot in comedy, because there was sort of a PC.
You're talking about Hannah Gadsby's.
Hannah Gadsby, yeah. And because there is a consensus, right? And people are punished for challenging the consensus in political ideas. They're not if they're challenging it in their material. In their performance, it is still quite merit-based, and you create your own opportunities based upon how well you connect and deliver for crowds. But in sort of communication and networking and the things that lead to booking on these shows, there are more consensus attitudes.
Okay.
And Nanette, that one had the most open conversation over what this even is. And because there's a lot of people who are comedy purists, right? Who they'll see someone do, like, they'll see like Bo Burnham do like this really pomo kind of theater play meets joke, that isn't exactly a joke. And they'll be like, oh, well, that's not stand up, like, whereas personally, I think that's kind of a dumb argument, because I think it's just you protecting yourself from not having to compete against someone changing the rules,
Yes.
changing the tool set. Yes. But it's not that important, It's like, I don't mean to put those people down either, because there is the literal writing the joke as a craft that is also difficult. It's just its own tool. But those people had like honest criticisms of Nanette, being like, is this really stand-up anymore? Like these sort of like full suffering projections. And even like Michael Shea, I think, wrote an article on saying, I don't think this is comedy. And Michael Shea's special was called Matters, saying, like, his joke was, guys, all we said was Black Lives Matter. You don't think we matter or something? Which is, like, I don't like that as like the reduction of like the people frustrated with how Black Lives Matters works as a movement. But at the same time, like, he is creating he is appealing to, I don't want to call it an SJW thing to like put people down, but he's appealing to an activist audience. And then when someone has a similar thing but on a different side of it, he's saying, well, maybe we should criticize how that works. And so that was a neat sort of moment of heterodoxy in a place that demands a lot of consensus.
So, but you it seemed like you were pursuing a thought with Nanette. Like, is that like kind of using comedy to get somewhere else? Like, it opens as comedy, it dresses up like comedy, but then it like sheds the comedic layer, and then it gets into
like, how hard? So I haven't seen it, so I it's hard to criticize. But it's like, as art, I hate censorship, so there's that. Like, so have that. From your analysis of her awards speech, essentially saying that like the evils of one man is borne by his full demographic, right? Yeah, and then the evils of one race is borne by that, right? It's like, it goes from one, hate all men, and then hate all white feminists, right? Or something, like within the same moment. It's like, wow, we're really ratcheting up the rhetoric here. But to that degree, you almost like wonder, like, was this always like, they say that PewDiePie is secretly training Nazis as like a hidden mind virus, right? Is that just psychological projection? Because that's exactly what she's doing in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, maybe in a way she's doing, whether intentionally or not, like a critique of like what it takes now to get in front of the crowd as a comedian. Like, you have to go through all these, like, I'm pro activism, pro this group, pro that group, anti that group, anti that group, anti this behavior. And she's just saying, okay, I'm tired of pretending that. I'm just going to come out and just say it and tell you why and give all the passion that I can muster in, like, the most heart-wrenching story and presentation that I can, because that's what we're doing anyway. So why stop? Why pretend like it's, that we're just pleasing you? Like, no, I don't want to please you anymore. I want to hurt you, so you understand why this is so important.
And then anyone who would oppose what I have to say or my conclusions from this want me to keep suffering. So if Mr. Benjamin Boyce online would challenge the notions of how this is born by all men, turns out he just wants Hannah Gadsby to continue feeling this pain. Well, right?
yeah. And it's either that or me trying to avoid suffering,
the responsibility of what you did.
Because, like, and I don't want to sacrifice my power as a white man. So any sort of critique is actually just a defense of my hegemony.
But the perfect irony of this is when Jonathan Haidt goes to Vox and explains to them, listen, if you put a higher standard of performance on white men in college, when they graduate, the only people who'll be able to do the job is white men. It's he's telling them, you're creating your own self-fulfilling doom.
No, they actually do that. But did Ezra Klein respond to that?
Okay, I don't think he said it in that one. I think he said that in an earlier interview, but he did have some smackdowns for Ezra. Yeah. I watched the Adam Friended stream for them just roasting it as it came through.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, the Democrats, one Democrat leader or somebody, I don't know, somebody made a tweet and it got a whole bunch of upvotes or likes on the tweet. And it was like,
was that Senator Gillibrand?
The Democratic Party were done with white men. We don't want them anymore. We're never going to vote for them anymore. And it's like, okay, that's a random thought. But then look at all the people who like that, who are cheering that along. I'm like, are you not forcing white men to band together to assert their power and their competency? You're basically you're forcing them to become patriarchal male supremacists with misogynist leanings.
All right, we're going to form a white men's drinking club, but everyone's allowed to come.
Yeah, right. And then that's the other thing. There's a spate of articles online now calling these white supremacist group problematic for inviting people of other races into it.
Exactly. They were saying, how come there's all these Asian white supremacists starting Patriot Prayer?
Or these Latino white supremacists, and there's even a black white supremacist, and it's just it's ridiculous, but at the same time it's kind of disturbing because these people are getting so many people agree with them, and they're in positions of power, and the game seems to be rigged, at least in the media sphere and more in the tech sphere and the corporate sphere, that you have to act this way or have to be on board with this stuff in order to advance in your job. So it's it's totally an emperor has no clothes. It's like, well, I can't say how ridiculous this is because then I'm going to lose my job or I'm going to lose my advancement.
Yeah, it was really funny. I became a brief scandal locally when someone they just posted a joke online that said what they had literally written was it would be great if all of these cishet white men wouldn't start a phrase by saying, now I don't agree with Jordan Peterson, but about his ideas, and then and for some reason, either I didn't get enough sleep that day and was stressed at work or something, but I saw it and I was like, is there anything you'd like me to clarify for you? And looking back, I can see now that 1,000-word reply is kind of being a dick, right? As Facebook is not a blogging platform, right? Maybe that passes on Reddit, But I was kind of imagining, all right, well let's lay out from A to Z how observations become conclusions, right? And then we can say which step in the middle here turned out to be sexist, right? Mm-hmm. And no, that was let's see, that was a lot of things. I was told that I was ignoring the emotional labor needed to educate me about the misogyny he was putting forward.
Oh, okay. Yeah. That's valid. That's totally valid.
Sure. Yeah. I didn't realize how much work it was to politely engage rhetoric.
Well, for some people, thinking is really emotionally taxing.
If only we could be paid to think. Actually, I guess that is what we're trying to do, isn't it? Right. Isn't it? Right. Like the actual emotional labor is professional YouTubing and stand-up. So, well, at least the one people actually get paid for. So,
well, yeah, and the art is to hide all that labor. You know, you don't see my heart sweating while I'm doing this work, but it's really going full bore.
Because you have learned to shed the shield of persona and allow the vulnerability to shine through to the YouTube audiences to really capture the hearts of the people around, as Campbell taught us to in that moment of pressure. But honestly, that's why I love Peterson so much when I found him, because like, I was in college around like 2004 or 5 and just incredibly stressed out at, I guess, the meaning of life. And I was an engineer. So like, if anything, this was completely unchallenged by my rigorous work, right? So it kind of like manifested as like this thing that was like kind of hidden. But I just remember seeing an article that was describing adulthood in America as passing 4 checks, which was graduate college, buy a house, get married, and have kids. And that just seemed like an incredibly insubstantial, like, coming of age or rite of passage, right? That was tied maybe far more to economics than to the spirit, right? And even though getting married and having a kid is deeply spiritual, we don't talk about it in those terms. We do, but like it's, you know, it's like this thing you do as opposed to like this participation in culture where you finally take like your responsibilities as an adult to like make this into a greater whole or something, right? And so like and so he basically comes out and says precisely the same thing about the lack of coming of age rights in boys, and not knowing what the hell they're even doing in college in the first place and failing out, you know? And so he tries one thing, which is, how about you write down what you actually want from your future, the end. We'll call it the future authoring test. We'll charge people $15 because then they'll actually buy it thinking it's medicine. But that's really all it is. It's like, hey, why don't you sit for 5 minutes and think, what do you actually want in the first place? And it turns out that raised everyone's GPA by a whole point. So, like, how can so stupid of an intervention be that powerful? Right? Like, this is like minimum base effort in giving a shit about yourself or about people, and like how that even like disappeared as a step. So,
so in your own college, like, how did you go through that kind of crisis of faith in the narrative that you'd been sold as an American male?
Well, I don't want to blame like the narrative, you know, as much as. Yeah, but
it's a reaction to that, yeah.
Yeah, but to answer your question, I overinvested in my rugby club, got real good at beating people up. That was so much fun. I was a team captain. It was super great. At one point I stopped going to class and started like making like pop art stencils to like vandalize places with. We lived in this old loft that was managed by a U-Haul storage facility, and on the top floor they had condos, but they didn't know what they were worth, so they were charging like, we had like 6 bedrooms for like $2,000 for the whole group. It was insane. And then someone bought it, and now it's all $1 million condos for like a tiny unit. But it was an incredible privilege for a while it lasted. But and so we would just like create weird shit, paint the walls there, you know. And I remember I had a roommate, like when I was thinking, well, I've already done this, but how does this actually accomplish something by changing it to have sort of a message embedded in it? And he's like, wow, Max, you're like an actual artist now or something. I was like, okay. But so that was a fun little tantrum. I guess my stand-up career is kind of the same thing, right? Like it started when I got fired from engineering, and I was like, I'm tired of this, and then kind of diving in, cashing in some savings, and just trying to write something good. And some of it is like, cause like that was the other side, just like being always so like having all these ideas and having no idea how to like actually write them, and being bad at writing, and then being angry that they're not getting written. It converting from that into, oh, we write this, we did it on stage, it was bad, we write this, it's good, and then it just keeps going. It's like, oh wow, this is becoming whole. This is like everything that I wanted to be as a person. What an amazing accomplishment, you know? And it's tested live, so it's not, and it's only 5 minutes long, so you don't have to like master the novel and then rewrite it over, you know? You just like kind of just figure it out and just fire, you know? And one really funny thing about the Jordan Peterson thing is, so he has this personality exam that does the Big Five scale thing. And so I wrote this one joke that after taking the personality exam, it's like 1-to-1 perfect. Like, so the joke was literally, like jokes are experienced differently 1-to-1 than they are. So it just might not seem funny, but it is funny, but I'm not telling you it's funny, but never mind. Just, but it's like, so a little bit about me. I like to think of myself as an empathetic narcissist. That means that if you are somehow suffering, I will do whatever I can to support you and to bear the load together. But your problems had better be worth my goddamn time. And just like this turn, everyone just like feels that sort of selfishness. And so I take his personality test, and then it says I score moderately high in compassion and the bottom first percentile in politeness. It's like, oh, this must be an accurate test, because that's exactly how my fucking material goes. So yeah, and like the roasts have been fun. Like we roasted one. Speaking of politeness, I mean, we roasted this one guy from Africa. He was born in Nigeria. He's the nicest person in the world. So the roast is going horrible because no one has any way to actually insult the guy. And I'm like, okay, well, let's just roast Africa instead, right? It's like so. It's like Yoshi Sadiq is the most polite, professional, supportive man I've met in comedy, because he knows all it takes is one phone call to Homeland Security, and he'll be mining for diamonds again, just like when he was 6. It's like, hey, Yoshi, was it weird buying an engagement ring for your wife, knowing that your best friend in kindergarten died digging the stone from the earth? It's like, ooh.
Okay, so this is another thing. How do I, or from here on out, if everything's going to be censored, or you're going to be defunded and deplatformed and kicked out for being rude, for being taken out of context, or for saying something that you just said is perfectly like textbook racist, but like you did not mean it that way. I mean, or you did mean it that way, but
it's
what happens to that form of humor?
What's really funny is that was universally praised as a set, and all of these people are extreme like activists against racism.
Yeah,
that's what's so funny about it. Because in fact, like the guy who went afterwards opened by saying, "How about that guy's really well-informed racism?" It's like, but see, it's there. There's a weird thing to breaking the rules with panache, right? And
but the thing is like the people who are enforcing the rules are doing it selectively, and they don't have senses of humor, or that sense of humor doesn't need to apply. They can just say, "Oh, that doesn't matter anymore because we don't want you around anymore." So panache is subtracted from the rules now.
Sure, it's one of two things, because I saw Tim Pool had a post earlier that said, "Why don't they go after Family Guy if they're also homophobic, racist, sexist, etc.?" Right?
Yeah.
And so either it's they know Family Guy can't be harmed by their protest, or it's they would look like idiots for going after something as benign as Family Guy. Like, it's kind of that North Korea thing again, right? Like, if it genuinely is funny, if everyone gets that no one's being harmed by it, you know, like, then maybe they make themselves weak by attacking you with their censor power. But I don't know exactly what the parameters are to successfully pull that off. Right? Yeah. Like, because you probably, whoever wrote the funniest joke with an N-word punchline or the funniest rape joke ever probably isn't getting that privilege, you know? That's probably still getting the we're offended because it is present, period, right?
Yeah. It seems like there's this calculus that they do, like maybe they messed up with Sargon, and I'm talking about the Patreon thing. So they apply this calculus, like we need targets that are big enough so we can squash the opposition, but not so big that we have a backlash, right? So they go after Milo because who's going to defend Milo? They're going to go after Spencer, of course, and I guess Alex Jones was like their test, like, okay, well, this is a pretty big target. Can we get away with this? Oh, we got away with this. Now let's go on to the subsidiary targets, and they can hide their political intentions behind this, this flag of virtue of hate speech or whatever, And Sargon,
I'm impressed by how principled Patreon is, that they're banning for hate speech against the Nazis. How about that, guys?
Yeah.
Like, apparently hating anyone is banned. Yeah, that one's so fascinating because it is literally, that one is the literal calculus of the N-word, right? It's like, it's like Bill Maher couldn't call himself one, right? But Sargon is now calling evil white people one, right? So it's like, what are the moral weights of these two moments, right? It's like, because if the word is supposed to represent like purified hatred, but it's being put upon people everyone already hates, can we let that one go, right? But if
you know what, I think that was just an excuse. I think that was just the excuse. And if you saw the blog post where they defended themselves, they're like, okay, here's the context of why we did this, and they completely stripped it of the context, and then presented that, because that word is so powerful that you can basically justify your completely incoherent, and totally politicized maneuver. Which I don't know, and we can get into why they targeted Sargon. Is it because he went from being a YouTube guy into politics? Is it because his followers? Is it because they don't want Trump elected 2020? Does it have something to do with PayPal? Does it have to do something with this or that? But
Sargon has kind of the Ben Shapiro problem in that their careers start as shit posters and end as serious people, right? So people try to hang like bullshit on them when they're trying to clean up their act, which is kind of unfair because they are trying to be better people, like he would defend this joke still, but like apparently there's a a British House member or Parliament member who was like raped in the past, and so but he really hated her politics, so he says, I wouldn't even rape you, right? And he's like saying that's what got him banned from Twitter, I think. And it's hard to defend it as a joke, but the only really way to do it is because he defends it by saying, I'm saying I wouldn't, guys. It's not a threat at all. I'm saying I wouldn't because whatever. But he but the other side of it is that the woman he's talking about says it's stupid, but frankly, it's not going to stop her, and she's not hurt by it. And it's like, well, if we're playing the game of subjective suffering, right? It's kind of like the same thing as when Kathy Newman was laughing at all the tweets she got in response to Jordan Peterson, and then changed her tune to say how harmed she was by everything, right? Yeah, it's like, it's like.
You can do both ways. You can get it's baked in. I don't know. It might be dishonorable for people on one side of the game to act that way. They're like, okay, we're not going to do that. And even the troll's honor wouldn't do that. Like Sargon wouldn't.
Troll's honor.
Yeah, right. So there's a troll's honor.
It's like the pirate's code.
Yeah, exactly. So
it's really just guidelines.
But there is like a form of honor like that Sargon can retreat behind. Like, okay, he, like you said, he was a troll to get attention, and then he's like, oh, actually, like now that I have all this power, I actually want to be a good user of that, But that he got the power through trollish means that he can always be reduced into a troll, no matter how clean.
Honor among trolls, I love that. That's a good meme. I'm sorry to cut you off, but like step one to signal your troll's honor is to subscribe to PewDiePie.
But that hypocrisy is another form of, I guess it's victim's honor, right? Or like SJW honor. It's like, okay, we can totally like laugh at this amongst ourselves, but then trot out our victimhood, because currency is victimhood. And you have to believe me, because I'm a blonde woman who has so much power in this man's world. Like, I had to fight tooth and nail. And it doesn't matter how much Jordan Peterson was actually on my side, like, or whatever, like that hypocrisy doesn't matter from their side, but there's also like on the alt-right or like the trolly Kekistani stuff. It's like there's also like kind of like this hypocrisy that's going on where they want to have it both ways. They want to be able to mock you and be respectable, and it's like that inconsistency itself leads to weakness, because the enemies can weaponize that, or always refer back to that time when he said you wouldn't even rape somebody.
That is. I called it the Ben Shapiro problem because he started as a more cultural critic than political analyst. Yeah, I think but he was also started when he was 18, so maybe he gets, or before then even, like he like wrote a book in middle school, I think. So, like, so maybe he gets more points, like more forgiveness points, just because like he was like the first person to have his childhood idiocy fully documented for the world. He just put it out himself.
Self-published his 14-year-old Twitter rants.
Yeah, as opposed to every kid these days, which has it just fully out there, so they'll never get a job. That'll be. I remember we had thought experiments thinking, is there going to be like an expungement of your digital record at 18? Will that be like a thing you're allowed to do, that that Google has to purge all of your information at a certain like threshold point or something as like a policy? Like, those would be interesting little, like the same way the courts have to purge your criminal record.
Okay, well, this goes back to what you were saying about like the metacourt of public or of outrage politics, right? Like you were saying that that's a compensation for the weaknesses of the justice system. And so I don't think that court ever wants those records to go away, because it would lose a lot of the best material. Because like, what's the best material of being outrageous is when you're like freaking 14 to 16, pumped up on a bunch of hormones that you haven't like fully gotten used to yet, and your brain isn't even wired correctly to have like the filters in place to keep you from doing that, or understanding the consequences of that. So like it seems like they would never want to give that up, because that would be
Yeah, I think people have rightly pointed out that that's the inherent vulnerability to this as a stable solution. So like even Michael Ian Black would comment, like he's been like activist supreme, but he commented online on Twitter, we have to have a reintegration process for Louis C.K. Like something that allows him to like pay for what he did and get back to work. And whereas most women comics who I see comments on it are saying, oh, he can go back to work. He'll just be like a manager at a Denny's or a coal miner, you're not welcome anymore or something, which ironically, they don't really have the power to do, because you're only as powerful as the amount of people who will buy a ticket to see you in the first place.
Yeah, exactly.
So, So the only thing that could happen is if every producer colluded together to prevent him from ever going in front of an audience, which no one has that power. But
I mean, the audience, their outrage contingent of the audience has the power, and they've been wielding their power very well. I'm just wondering, like, how do we game solutions?
Oh, and so they end up doxing every attendee of a Louis C.K. concert as if it was an attendee at the Unite the Right Charlottesville rally.
Yeah, exactly. Like you are now a public masturbator by association.
Proxy, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, every dollar you spent is another woman masturbated in front of. Atone for your crimes.
And here's a towel.
Yeah, well, this is funny, because this is like the inverse of brands donating to charity, right? It's like, buy this pink thing and Susan G. Komen gets $1, right?
Yeah.
It's like, now it's like, buy this brand and Tucker Carlson got $1. You just supported white supremacy in America, motherfucker.
Yeah, huh.
So
I wonder if there's a penance product that you could do.
Dude, that is exactly what charity is.
Yeah.
It is a corporation at the scale of Coca-Cola that has no product except for plenary indulgences. And it's we've just opted into something instead of the church to operate it.
And do you think that Louis C.K. could do something like that to get back in the good graces of women that he's offended, or the people who are offended on behalf of the women that he's offended?
I mean, Dave Chappelle was trying to answer this question when he was talking about like the Women's Scholarship Fund started by Bill Cosby, right? It's like he saved these women and he raped these women, but did he save more than he raped? Yeah. That's the real question. And so he proposes this moral utilitarianism of public virtue versus your evil deeds. Yeah. Exactly. Huh. And so, which becomes such a funny joke all in and of itself. You know, it's like this brand new spiritual battle of modern existence to try to overcome our sinful natures. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And which, honestly, to be fair to the activists, they have let so many scandalous things become like chill these days, you know, like between sexual fetishes and whatnot. So if you can't fit into their bubbles of just acceptable weird, then you must be really weird. Mm-hmm. Right?
That is a odd mixture, like the libertine, do whatever you want and we're going to praise you. Unless you're into heterosexual missionary position, I mean that's no longer allowed. But if you violate
heterosexual missionary watching me jerk off while I block the door, that one was a little weird.
You have a mind for this, I have to say. But there's just another like interesting mixture of like. I don't want to call them perversions because I want to be politically correct, but you can be any sort of thing except for this and this and this. Right. Mm-hmm. Like there's these things that are totally off limits and will shame you to death, but you can never, ever shame us because that's a sin. For these other things over here, it's like it just seems like there's another inconsistency, but maybe it's not inconsistent. Maybe there is a consistency there because it works into.
It's kind of fascinating because it's I feel like the only real solution to Me Too is a new code of chivalry.
Yeah. Well.
Or we just always stay like hyper terrified of men, right? One of the two. And that doesn't seem stable. But
well, the problem with chivalry is that like it has to be all across the board. If men have to act in a certain way, then women have to act in a certain way. And the whole code to follow. I don't know if I agree with this totally, but to follow Karen Strawn, it's like if you can look at feminism as a progression of women progressively earning men's rights and shirking their own responsibilities. And I don't think that chivalry will be welcomed because that would also like ask that there's like a two-party system. Like, okay, well you don't have to put on a hijab, but you have to stuff away those yoga pants while we're in a work environment, and then the men will no longer.
Exactly. It is a codification, rigidity of behavior that grows to inflate into a new oppression. Right? Yeah. Like the thing that is protecting us from the danger of male misdeed is now the thing preventing us from expressing ourselves as adventurous people.
Yeah, exactly. The slut walk wouldn't work in the era of chivalry. Like it would.
Yeah, it would not.
Like it would work against that, unless it's openly taunting men. Like, no, you have to prove how chivalrous you are by watching this parade.
We could do it once a year as like a Yule celebration, like the annual slut walk, you know, as like and we even codify it mythologically as like, and then the rapist came from the forest to come and attack the sluts, but the virtuous men struck them down with their clubs, and lo, the society was able to continue. Do it just as the ancients would.
Yeah. Plus a fully consensual bathhouse visit afterwards.
Yes, that's our annual Shynock orgy. Just to get everyone's weirdness out. You do it right before Lent. It already works perfect. Like Mardi Gras, freaking. Is that just what Carnival is? Like the annual slut walk?
Basically, yes. With beads, yeah.
Wow, we just figured it out. Good job, team.
There we go. Ancient rituals.
Well, because those are the dressings that create like what the affective drive towards like the meaning of these changing seasons, coming of ages. You know, we can have them. That's why we have pomp and circumstance and graduation. You know, honestly, I was thinking a lot about this because I always thought dead naming was a stupid concept as an offense, because precisely as Eric Weinstein was demonstrating with the, how can I show praise to a scientist while saying born this name? Have I now broken the rules? Right. And like, it's not a stable solution if you need the rest of the world to act as if history didn't happen, right? Like that's a literal like 1984 solution where we have to like wiki edit the past, you know? Like it is more appropriate, like they deserve some kind of ceremony. There's lots of moments in life where like your name is changed, you know, in baptism, people's names are changed, in a confirmation, your name is changed, in marriage, your name is changed. Like, and these are like the pivotal moments of your life. Like transitioning can be codified spiritually as a way of saying, so it doesn't harm you to say, oh, no, that was the name I was born as. That's not my name anymore. You know, of course, I don't understand how that, I don't experience how that trauma affects me through my lived experience. But at the same time, it's like, if you want like a stable way forward, this, like you can look to how humanity has worked forever, you know? And I think, you know, it's, Twitter just goddamn fucking banned for dead naming. I can't believe that. Like, it is like the most stupidest way to wield that authority in my mind.
And it's only going to be applied selectively too. And there will always be that calculus, like who can we target that's big enough, but not too big, right? So we need to get people out. So we'll keep the lower people scared, and then the higher people up in our system. We'll let Ben Shapiro go around dead naming people, you know, because if we piss him off, like that's okay. We need the jester. We're strong enough to take him, but and we're not going to go through and ban all the accounts that are doing this, but like somebody like within Megan Murphy, like she's just strong enough to send a message to everybody else that you need to be scared about this.
But like even with that, like, do you remember when Bunty King? Are you familiar with him?
A little bit.
Yeah, he got banned when he made an ASCII art of a person getting kicked off a ledge, yelling "turf," and like kicking them off like the cliff, and so they banned him for making a text comic about feminists killing a turf. And then Twitter bans the TERFs for like gender absolutism. What? I don't know.
Yeah.
Or it's actually quite funny because it's like the feminists criticize the trans because the trans argue that there are binary genders that biologically were wrong in their body, when the feminists want them to be malleable, but the trans people are the ones living the malleability. So like the ideology and the behavior are completely in conflict for the entire like organization, at least from that slim focus. But really, I only know all of this from your videos, so I'm limited in the actual knowledge of it. I do have to say, I know this was not your mission of your channel, and but like your reporting of Evergreen was definitely my like quote unquote red pilling, like as the first thing.
Oh, really?
Like, yeah, because I remember I saw the Vice documentary on Brett and that girl who like does that, and I don't know what it was, but for some reason this was like the biggest story possible in my mind, and nobody knew about it, and nobody seemed to care or think it was a big deal. And I'm like, do you guys see what's literally happening here? Like this is like a political rally against like science itself. Like I got tired of my religion when I heard someone say, but why would God create the aliens? Right? Like, like when I saw someone say, like, I stayed in when I saw a Pentecostal scream, well, I'm not a monkey, because I expect fundamentalists to be crazy in the first place. Right? But like this kind of behavior is, literally insane, but no one paid attention to it at all. And so I was like searching for just more information, like what is happening here? And the only people were Tucker Carlson and you, funny enough. And so I just kept tuning into like more, data that, and honestly, you had great primary reporting on the entire thing. Congratulations on the Citation and Heights book, by the way.
Oh yeah, that was great feeling.
And then that, like, I was talking to, we have our own like Whisper network of like moderate, not even conservative, but just like moderate political comedians who just like chat to each other. Yeah. And it's like, can you believe this guy? No, wow, insane. I know, just to like offset. And so I was like, have you heard about this story? And he's like, yeah, that was fucked up. They're similar to the Jordan Peterson McMaster thing. And I remember seeing that come on Reddit, and I was just thinking the same way Sam Harris did about Charles Murray. Like, when there's smoke, there's fire. I'm sure he's a bad guy. But then going back to look at it, it's like, wow, this is just stupid. Like, this guy's freaking harmless that you're angry at. And and then there was like a few months of just watching literally everything the guy ever had online. And then being a year ahead of the rest of culture as he finally emerges and everyone thinks he's sexist, and then being like, really? Well, would you like to know more?
Yeah. Here's 1,000 words in a YouTube comment.
1,000 words. And how we get from A to misogyny. You tell me where the misogyny snuck in. Let's make a game.
Yeah. So maybe it does prey upon the like with Patreon, like they put out this tweet saying that explained their banning of Sargon and said, here's more context, and then they linked to a freaking Medium article that somebody who had worked at PayPal for 9 years before working at Patreon, wrote. Yeah. And but they dressed it up like, we do not support hate speech. This is our value. This is our virtue. We do not support hate speech. And like most people are like, yeah, just like Evergreen. Like, no, if you are against our anti-racism, you are racist. And Brett's like, no, actually, your anti-racism is going to do more damage than anybody else. But the lower effort, they're leaning on the low amount of attention that it'll get, and it'll just wash over.
This is interesting because this plays into your calculus equation as well, and also the Family Guy challenge. If activists wanted to have actual change, they would focus all their attention on prison sentencing.
What's that?
Like prison sentencing.
Okay.
Like if they could have if that could be meaningfully changed, then that would cover everything that they want to accomplish. Right, between like families being held together, between stable like whatnot, especially for nonviolent offenses, especially for drug offenses. But they can't because there are mandatory minimums written for many, many laws, for many crimes, particularly drug crimes, right? And so anytime there's a mandatory minimum, even a wise judge is not allowed to intervene to allow like a person already getting his life together who just got caught when he shouldn't have, for a thing he's already stopped doing, He can't give people like a slap on the wrist if they're bound by statute, right? And so when Brock Turner got way too light of a sentence for raping this woman, like they passed a law forcing everything of this kind of case that bear a sentence that was much more severe, and many people were celebrating that we're finally righted the wrong. And I'm like, no, anyone who can't afford a real defense coming against this, who maybe isn't guilty, is going to jail for this duration now. And that's going to be all broke people who face it, and probably mostly minorities. So you've just inserted precisely the injustice that you're trying to fight out of like the emotional rage for this act of leniency, which was a very unfair moment, right? But from what we're talking about from the start, like that precise that network of public rage, particularly against rape, it was so powerful, it created an injustice that it claims to hate through the mandatory. There should be no mandatory minimum sentences for anything. That's my belief. Like even from, I think that should align with every political party. Like simply because even with Donald Trump's defense, it's like yes, we should care about the Constitution because like the worst among us deserve the rights that everyone gets, right? Like, period. Like that's how we can be assured that any of us can get through a thing if we are innocent. Like we rely on that. Alas, you know.
It's interesting because, ironically enough, George Bridges, who's the president of Evergreen, who's the current president and the one who's overseen its demise.
The man who does not know if he's a white supremacist. Yeah. Jesus fucking Christ.
Actually, there's a rumor. Anyways, ironically enough, like his doctoral thesis and most of his career, a lot of his earlier career was trying to figure out sentencing in Washington that specifically targeted negatively the African American or minority intersection of minority and poor community, which in Washington would statistically be the black community. So like if you actually go through and read his thesis, it actually crumbles if you actually read the stats and stuff, because it doesn't do what it doesn't say what it's purporting to say, for a number of different reasons. But it's still like his whole like career is basically to help out this one specific population. And when he gets to Evergreen, the first thing he does when he gets to Evergreen is he does this. He interrupts like the opening ceremony for the year, commencement, I think it's called, or orientation, or whatever it is. I can't remember the difference between the end of the year and the beginning of the year. But he interrupts it to do this 5-minute, 10-minute speech on how racism is the most important topic of the day, and this is something that it has never been solved, and we need to take this seriously. So what he does that explicitly, and then he starts to empower certain people within the group, and he doesn't look at their data, he doesn't look at their thinking skills, he just promotes the people who are for this, we're going to take on race by the horns, we're going to grab it by the horns, let's get Robin DiAngelo here, let's make sure that every white student and every white professor knows that they're complicit in white supremacy. And you know what, that's not enough, we need the Asians and the Jews to understand that too. And anyway, so what it ends up happening at the end in like the 2017 explosion is that all the people who categorically fit within like what he starts, whenever you watch his speeches and he talks about this group, he'll start crying. Like he really cares about these people. They're the ones who betray him. They're the ones who pillory him. And then it ends up like all of his work does so much harm to race relations in America. Like that basically proves all these racists right about this one group of people, that they're power hungry, lazy people. and I'm not saying that that's true. It's not true at all. It's because if you go through,
it's just gerrymandered a social environment that produces everyone's
worst,
every person on the right's biggest straw man.
Yeah,
you've just created it.
Yeah, he's created the straw man.
And not just that, the roving gang that showed up in the midst of it, you put in a position to rewrite the rules against them.
Yeah.
Literally, like Hitlerian Soviet bullshit, right? Like,
and then they blame it, and then a year later, when they write the report, he hires a bunch of cronies of his to write this report, exonerating him and pinning it all on Brett Weinstein and Charlottesville, which happened 3 months later. And you can't make this stuff up.
Time is convoluted.
No, it's a fucking social patriarchal construct, man. Father fucking time, get real, man.
I mean, gender is a social construct in the way that protons and electrons are a social construct, right? Like these words we invented to place upon nature that don't exactly have to be those words or anything, Jesus. So, gosh. I had a weird experience a few years ago. So when I was running a podcast, my producer was really in tune with all of the weird happenings in Florida. It's where she lived at the time while I was operating out of Atlanta. And she found one guy who was running for United States Senate in Marco Rubio's seat as a libertarian. And we found his YouTube channel where he was chanting Enochian poetry to honor the angels and demons that inhabit the world around us. And the way I wrote the joke was starting with the YouTube channel. And this guy was running for United States Senate in the state of Florida. When the world seems like it's losing its mind, Florida keeps raising the bar.
Yeah, totally.
And so I really wanted to talk to the guy, and the conversation was interesting, but he got in trouble later when it came out that he had participated in a religious ceremony where he ritually sacrificed a goat and drank its blood. And so he was like an openly practicing Thelemite, like those kinds of like types. And some people had called him racist, but all of his kids were mixed race, so I gave him the benefit of the doubt, you know? Uh-huh. And because it's like, isn't it hard to be a racist when your kids are like, they literally vow to protect white children, right? Like, uh-huh. Does that not include theirs? Like, fuck, that doesn't make sense to me. But, and apparently he's so horny, he only dates bisexual women so he can have orgies. So that's not exactly homophobic, right? Right? Like,
technically speaking, yeah.
Technically speaking, yeah. And so I gave him the benefit of the doubt. But when that whole scandal about that specifically came out, like, I just saw a lot of hypocrisy in Christianity as it related to politics about like the moral virtue necessary to it, and that there could be ways to be morally driven outside of just like the confines of like this rule set. So I was like, you know what? You're all upset that he killed this animal. Well, I think it's more moral to know that to understand that you're killing an animal before you eat it instead of buying its meat at a store, right? And I do think that is true. You're honoring the sacrifice of the animal, and et cetera, and understanding that we grow stronger together despite the death created for our own nourishment. And it's a painful idea, but it's like we are the beneficiaries of millennia of evil. You know, and it's just a thing to remind yourself to be good at. Well, I ended up writing a blog post that basically argued exactly this, and I think that was a mistake because this guy, 2 years later, last year, ends up as a booked speaker for the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia.
Oh, okay, there you go. Like you played your cards right there.
Well, if I'm ever questioned about my support of this man, I'll just make one thing perfectly clear. I was writing in favor of ritualistic animal sacrifice followed by pagan blood orgies in the woods. The second that becomes about white supremacy, no thank you. Yeah.
It's nice to know that you do have a line.
Sorry to bits. Anyway, it was conversational. Anyway, but like, honest to God, though, when I found his YouTube channel, I thought he might suspect himself to be the Antichrist. And because I just know crazy people, right, who've told me they're the devil. And like, we had one close friend in college who he had a psychotic break around the exact time he started reading the more Gnostic materials. And it got to the point where he started organizing parts of my friend's living room into a sigil and burning charcoal on his carpet. And they called the cops on him because he was having a freaking mental break, right? And he started threatening, like, he ended up like threatening his family and threatening to kill us. And I think he's still in jail. And he's just fucked. And the friend who introduced him to that Gnostic material, I think he actually believes that the devil came inside of him, right? And that the mystic is real. And I mean, I can't fault him too much. I can't fault people who take it too seriously that much. I mean, like, you and I are in media. We literally believe in magic words, right? Yeah. Oh, like, we try to broadcast them across like the world. Hell, you were just telling a woman she's not magic enough in her Christianity. Was that like yesterday or the day before?
It was 2 days ago, but it got published yesterday.
Yeah, but
I mean, no, yeah. It's you speak about magic words, like the word that I'm scared to even pronounce its first letter. That word, like that word is so powerful, and it grows in power with every execution of those who render that. Like that is the word that will allow you to be marched up for our like collective benefit to watch your ritual slaughter, right? Like that is a totally magical word. And it certainly people can come out and say, what, that word does bring up histories of oppression and ancestral stuff, and that word should be respected, if not worshipped, but it's just, it's weird that it's become a sacred word.
Do we worship Satan by rejecting him? Like, we have to create him to reject him, right?
I don't think that Satan's bad. I think it's mistranslation.
When we participate in Christianity,
yeah,
we have to identify Satan to reject it, right?
Maybe. I think there's certain. I went through most of my Christianity. I mean, my dad, the pastor who was my father who was a pastor, like he did establish a binary of good and evil, but evil was never Satan. Evil was kind of like the world and it wanting to like basically devour you and not give you anything back. But that wasn't. It wasn't. Well, I guess it was necessary in his formula. You don't need Satan, but you certainly do need sin. So that's part of the equation that you can't get away. And a lot of people just say, okay, well, there's sin because there's Satan. I just think, but I think that's...
Yeah, I don't agree with that. Yeah. It's like the shadow side of the Garden of Eden story was teaching man, you don't have to be idiots. You can be like gods. Go, like, accomplish everything you can do, right?
Yeah.
And then when we do that to its fullest extent, we end up suffering profoundly from our, like, our celebration of ego and our intellect by itself, that we fall in love and worship ourselves and then don't understand how we're failing to connect to the world and to our families and to like love and peace. And then we realize, oh, this is why that was a sin to begin with. Right.
Yeah. Like, but sometimes like you just don't have time to read that end user license agreement. You just have to live it.
Yeah.
You know?
I don't remember clicking accept when I was born. All right. I didn't ask for this, motherfucker.
I don't even remember a CAPTCHA. I don't even know if I'm real or not. You know?
I want to talk to life's lawyer. Motherfuckers. But yeah, like, I remember having no one taught me this. I was very proud of this. But like, I figured out at one point that I thought that the Garden of Eden story represented a state of pre-birth where like literally matter and energy flow perfectly in a system with no consciousness that impedes the process of beauty and form and idealism. And then suddenly this one ball of mass and energy started calling itself me. And from that point forward, it's fully trying to figure out how to find its way back into harmony with that system and failing beautifully along the way until ultimately it doesn't really get a choice. It just kind of is welcomed back into like the whole of it, you know? But it just seemed like a neat way to start.
The imposition of, well, I mean, isn't that like kind of similar to the state of flow? Like as an artist, like we're seeking that state of flow. We're seeking that state where, yeah, I've done all this work. I've done all this ego work. I've done all this, you know, building of myself as a brand. I've even created a god out of myself that people can watch and listen to and stop what they're doing and just put their brains on hold while they watch me. Right. But yeah, but all of that is like you were saying at the very beginning about, you know, becoming vulnerable and confident at the same time, like reaching a state where like I am still fully me and fully in charge of everything that I do, but I've achieved a state of relaxation and exertion that I'm no longer imposing drag on the state of reality. I'm actually merged with it, and actually not even that, I'm heightening it. By the way that I'm merging with it, I'm giving a boost. I am the steroid that reality is using to reach the next level, kind of thing.
Because of the magic words you've crafted that put it back into the, and all the tools you gained hiding behind that persona are now like what was a shield is now instead of a weapon that can be placed surgically to like maximize these moments, you know? It's like, so all of our moments of suffering or coping suddenly become features instead of bugs, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Personality is just a coping mechanism, but you can have a beautiful personality, you know?
Some people can. Yeah. And that's ultimately the downfall of hyper social justicism as an art form, is that it doesn't allow that transcendence of the form. You have to It's only the exaltation of the form that allows you to be oppressed. It's never a transcendence of that form, in a way. Like you cannot be free of self-consciousness by becoming more and more meta about yourself. I mean, that's the lesson of postmodern literature that we should all,
Yeah, you can never. To be free of your oppression would be to lose everything that gives you strength, right? Yeah. So when we finally defeat the patriarchy, we will have to oppress ourselves to maintain our moral purity. And then we'll continue in our beautiful socialist future.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that I'm totally straw manning them, or that argument in a way.
Well, it's the
it's the aggregate output of everything I've been watching unfold, though.
But you're also the person who's able to put I don't want to call it theological terms, but at least metaphorical terms to like the structure of a culture that's developing out of it. Like what's fascinating about Jonathan Haidt to me is that he's made it actually quite clear that religious people are more capable of rationale in the secular territory because they've put velvet ropes around all the sacred ideas, right? So if they want to have a conversation on purely rational topics, they won't trip over anything they've decided is out of bounds. So they can actually get literally like to that process where if there are no like explicit ropes, you're going to go and like kill someone's sacred cow without realizing it in a normal conversation, right? So in this bizarre reverse like situation, the people who believe in invisible sky gods are the ones who are capable of having the most reason. And that's exactly the opposite of how it's supposed to work, right? It's like, Jesus, like this is fucking me up just when I realized that. But and then that's the moment I was like, you know what, maybe my parents weren't idiots when they were so into God. I'm so sorry, Mom.
You know what, that is the, like, you know what, you brought up college education, and then getting a job, getting a wife, getting a family, those as the markers. But like realizing that your parents were smarter than you thought they were, that's a rite of passage in and of itself.
You know what? That deserves like a plaque or like a thing or a party. You know, that's just call it prodigal son time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Killing the fatted calf.